There's Eddie and Doug. And I have stuff to...
Yeah, no, I was visiting.
Well, hello. My name is Susan Lovier, and I work figuratively, and I have done that since about 1984. And I think since about the late 90s, mid-90s maybe, I started to work in series. And so these bodies of work, so there's really just 3 bodies of work here, and they were all fairly large series that we kind of pared down for this occasion. And I think what I'll do is talk to you a little bit about this body of work first, and then go sort of to state of grace, and then about face, because that'll give you a little bit of a chronology. So this was done in the early 2000s, and I had been introduced to Japanese paper by a woman, Nancy Jacoby, who runs a Japanese paper. She used to run a Japanese paper store. She now runs the warehouse. She sold that. And she insidiously said, I'll give you some free paper. Why don't you just try it and see what you'll do? Well, I fell in love with it and started to paint on it and then try to combine. I think I'm a person that always likes to combine things. So I combined sculpture with the Japanese paper. And one of the reasons I liked the Japanese paper so much was that you could hang it flat on the wall. You could alter the size of it. With Western paper, they're fairly stiff papers often, and they're very defined sizes. And so I tried at first to work with those papers, and I felt it needed a frame around them. I couldn't just put them on the wall, and I was really interested. I've been interested in activating the wall as part of the whole sculpture. Because I had done, before I started this, an installation of small figures at the Mississauga Art Gallery. I had gone to Banff and started working with those, and then did this installation of small figures. And it was figures that filled the whole space, from ceiling to floor. I kind of put them at random, and I was really interested in the effect that those figures, the way those figures worked with the wall, because they were sort of like these. They just were stuck to the wall with just a screw and hung on, and they were about that size. So after that, I started to think, okay, well, how could I combine and work with the wall and also sculpture, and hang sculpture on the wall in a different fashion? And that's how these came about. So you can see that we hung them in this way where they have a rhythm. And the negative spaces, in other words, the spaces around the actual pieces, are important. So you can see that piece is low down, and there's a big gap between that one, and then these two are closer together, and then this dips down, and this dips up, and then this dips up even higher and down. So there's a rhythm, and the negative space, the wall, becomes part of the whole installation. And there were, these are called tools for daily living. And initially when I did this body of work, there were 23. I still have quite a few at home, but I don't have 23 things. And they're all to do with inside the body. So the tools that you take for granted that help you live, but we don't really pay much attention to those tools. So they're the heart, the lungs, the nerves, the eyes, inside the eyes, breath and voice, the embryo, the brain, lungs, so that kind of thing. So they're the inside the body, and I started to play with that. And I guess I had I was really interested because I had done this body of small figures, and so I incorporated some of these small figures in with the drawing of the inside the body. By the way, I'll talk, but I would love afterwards if you wanted to ask me a question. Yeah, would you like to ask a question? Absolutely.
My confession is that I'm a mechanical engineer. When we talk about art, we have to forgive me.
Okay.
But I was really fascinated, particularly with this one. Yeah, this one. And I looked at the human form, I guess we'll call it, on the paper. And I was very impressed that it didn't pull the paper out from the wall. You know how it would do that? And
You want to know how it's hung? Okay, I'll tell you my secrets. All right, so actually this piece actually just has a little hole made out and a screwed into the wall. It's very, very easy. And this piece is hung on that. Yeah. So, ta-da! But other ones are more complicated.
Well, I looked at it and I thought, that must be incredibly light, that figure, to be on that paper and not pull it out from the wall.
Well, it is actually on the, but the figure is fairly light because they're hollow. They're made of clay and they're hollow. Yeah.
I must say this show has been quite something to install. And, I've learned lots of tricks in the process, so it's a good line of questions.
Yeah, it's taken us since we started at 7 last night, and I think we just finished around 6 last night. When we ran into many complexities that we didn't anticipate.
Well, just to follow through Doug's question, I'll add, I mean, when he said that, I thought, are you silly? Of course she's just doing that. I thought, you know, that gives this piece a whole new feeling to it. It has a lightness to it that you wouldn't have if it were all clay.
That's right. That's right. So, and also it kind of speaks to, well, yeah, like this piece. I mean, somehow you almost think of it as being part of the wall, right? The lightness of the wall and then the sculpture. I've always been really interested in trying to make clay, which, if any of you have worked in clay, tends to want to be on the ground and sink. And would know. And so I've always been interested in trying to lighten it and make it kind of fly or stand up or be more up in the air. So I've worked in various ways to do that with poles and stacking and on the wall and, well, I guess with the heads sort of on the wall.
I've got a question. I want to know whether you go back into the drawings and work on them again after you've lived with them, or I don't know if you do live with them, but when I put things on the wall, I see the problems and I take them off. And with clay, I give them another firing load, but put more colour on them and work. And the longer they stay, and I'm wondering if that's the same here, because I saw some early ones which were much thinner in their context.
I tend to take a long time to do a series, and I live with it at that time, and I'm completely involved in it. And then once it's done, and it's out there, and it's been shown or whatever, I tend to go on to something else. I don't really revisit it and work on it anymore. But that doesn't mean that this hasn't been worked on many, many times, because what happens is I tend to work on about 4 or 5 at the same time. They're all hanging up in my studio, and I'll do one thing on one, and then I'll do another thing on another, and I'll come back and I won't know what to do. And then I'll finally come back when I know what to do on another one, or I might go to another one. Probably anybody who's been working in art does that kind of thing, but so that's sort of how I do it. It takes me a long time to say, okay, this is finished, and I'm so delighted to say to myself that it's finished that I whisk it away and put it away, and then don't tend to revisit it again. So that's
Are there any more questions about this body of work? I'm going to talk about the other. But so okay, so this is the work where there's a found object, and I would say just a couple more things is that I only used 3 figures for these 23 pieces. So I used a kernel figure, I used what I call a frog figure, and then I use a figure that hangs down like that. And with this work was one of the first times that I started to use molds, actually. You can see, so these figures are made from molds that I made, and so they're similar. And I ended up altering them with the surface. And I think I followed through with that idea of starting to work with molds. I like the surface quality that I get from pressing into a mold more than actually sculpting. I can't get the freshness that I like from sculpting it purely. So I've been pressing in with molds, and I find that more satisfactory for what I want. So we can go to this body. Are any more questions? Numbers on the side here. You know, I have no idea why. Okay, because there's no sequence. No, I know. I think at one point,
That's the number.
it was a long time ago, and I did have a reason for that. Something to do with climbing, and I'm sorry. That's okay. You just have to admit. So, okay, one other thing I should say about these is that I make the work, and I purposely always make it ambiguous enough that you, the audience, have to put your own meaning into it. And if it's not ambiguous for me, it's enough that it can be open-ended for you, it's not successful for me. So I always want there to be more than one meaning or layers or something. And part of the reason for that is that if you ever bought one of these, that it would feed you. You could look at it and see one thing one time and something else another or whatever, so that it can, as opposed to, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
It's about voice, it's about song and voice and mouth and, and throat.
And the figure is kind of
Well,
out of breath.
Yes. You're going to say, and you can't expect me to be logical. There's not going to be too much logic to this. It's got to hit you right here. Because, well, it can hit you here, but it's also got to hit you here, and I can't be linear. I'm just warning you, it won't work.
So there are 23 of them.
There were 23 of these, and they, I had them in many different places in different galleries.
Is there one with soul? Is the soul?
A soul? There was actually one about soul. I think I had, maybe Phil didn't, I think I still have that one. We didn't pick that one.
I don't know, but the Japanese paper, the way you managed to do them, this color.